Hi guys, welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you guys? Hopefully everybody's logged on. We'll give everybody a few minutes here just to make sure that you guys feel everybody's good, comfortable. For those of you guys that are logging on for the first time, I am Chase. I will be leading us through this SAT review tonight. I'll be able to see all your comments come in. Please try to keep your comments towards the SAT. If you guys have any questions for me, please let me know. Please make sure that your comments are appropriate for the setting and for all the stuff that we'll be looking at tonight. And yeah, guys, I think we'll be able to accomplish a lot tonight. So we'll try to go from about 6 to 8 Pacific time, so that's 2 hours or so. Generally, everybody has a lot of the same questions, so it doesn't typically go too far past that. But if you guys have any questions for me, let me know. And yes, great question. So good start to the questions. The live stream will be on the channel tomorrow, guys. So yeah, you guys will be able to catch up. You'll see all the comments too, as well as the live chat. So you guys will have opportunities to catch up and review that. Okay, any general questions, guys? Just as we let everybody kind of get on, work through this stuff, any general questions about the test? We've already had a few. Come through. So yeah, guys, give us about maybe 2-3 minutes to make sure that everybody gets a chance to log on. We're still waiting for a few students here in Los Angeles to come and be in person. They'll be asking good questions too, hopefully. And yeah, guys, we'll be ready to go. Looking forward to it. So give us about 2 to 3 minutes. In the meantime, actually, before we say that, before I just leave you guys, there's a couple things I want you guys to do. We'll talk about it. You guys don't have to. This is not because I want you guys to give the company Instagram followers or anything like that. But if you do, look at our Instagram page. Over the course of the next 2 days, even if it's just for 2 days, we will be giving you guys updates on this test. I mean, it's just to kind of speak on that first. It's kind of a tricky situation. I don't know how many of these schools will be, or how many testing locations will cancel. I don't know if the SAT. I mean, there's a chance that they cancel the whole thing tomorrow. They're updating their kind of regularly on that note. So guys, if we're gonna give regular updates on our Instagram story, it's at Star Tutors for Instagram. So if you guys follow us, you should see updates. We actually reached out to the college board yesterday, and they direct messaged us. I included that. Let's write this in. I included that as part of the updates, and we hopefully gave some good information as to how you could access that. So that's the first thing. The second thing I want you guys to take a look at is, so we have this tutoring app. I'm sure that for those that have watched our videos in the past, Star U. Again, what we're looking for here is for warm-up problems. So we'll talk about that tonight and how to best prepare yourself for Saturday. But there's some warm-up problems that you guys can do. We think it's a big deal if you guys play a sport or if you're in the play. You don't just show up to the play and you're like, I guess we're doing this tonight, right? You think about it. You want to do better. You want to make sure your lines are there. You guys do things that will, that will maximize your ability. So I just want to make sure that we are doing the same thing for the SAT to get your mind warmed up. 8 a.m. for a 16, 17-year-old on a Saturday morning is never going to be fun. There's a lot of kind of extenuating circumstances today and going into this Saturday test that are different from any other test that we've ever experienced in the last 7 years. So it's good to address those, and it's even more important to recognize that these warm-ups are going to be really important. Okay? So again, you guys, any general questions as we go through this? Any general questions regarding the test overall? Anything at all? While you guys are coming up with some of those questions, we will we'll wait for everybody to go here. How's everybody feeling just about the test in general, just while we wait? Anybody have any bad experiences? Anybody feel like they're overwhelmed already? If nothing else, anybody's have their school's canceled. We saw some updates today. We saw updates today from various states across the country that have been just canceling schools altogether. If you're an international student tuning in, I know that there's been a number of locations that have been canceled on the international front. So yeah, I mean, we feel for you guys. It's not easy right now. It's not easy to keep keep kind of a calm mind as all this stuff's going on. But yeah, it's going to be. I want you guys to just keep working hard. Yeah, so good question. So we get a question about going through it in order. Generally, we try to keep it in order, but at the beginning of the test, we'll talk about, or beginning of the review, we'll talk a lot about just general tips that will help you guys for the test in general, overall, what you want to be thinking about. In terms of the actual sections, then we'll probably go in order. It tends to vary just based on different reviews that we've had in the past. But for the most part, we'll try to go in order just to kind of keep some structure to this. But the questions go in a lot of different directions a lot of the times. Great question overall, though. But yeah, we'll start with the reading section tonight. Talk a little bit about that. That's probably the one we'll talk about the least, to be honest, just because that's the one we know the least about in terms of going into Saturday. There's certain strategies that we'll talk about, but we'll discuss a little bit more about the test in general. It's a good question, though. Okay. Okay, guys. So let's keep going here. All right, let's keep going, guys. Yeah, great question. Oh, and two more things, guys. Before we get going, before we get started, I'm going to type in, I'm going to send you guys the link for both one of the tests I want to take a look at tonight, just so you guys have it in front of you. And I'm also going to send you guys the link for where you can check your school location. So give me 1 sec, guys, and then we'll get going. Another great question. Good start to the night, guys. Okay, guys. You have it pulled up here. Hopefully. All right, guys. Did everybody see those links come through? Everybody see those links come through? Any questions? Anybody have any trouble opening those links? So the first one again is the testing center cancellations. I'm not sure that's been it's been to be honest not even regularly updated, so I'm not sure what that's going to look like over the course of the next 48 hours. But I encourage you guys to copy down that link. So just copy it and then check back maybe every 12 hours or so just to make sure that you guys are good. And then the second link is over a test that we'll be covering. We'll be taking a look at. Okay, great. And then actually, I'm going to post one final thing here, guys, and then we can really get going. This is potentially the most important thing that you guys will see. Okay, so then I posted one last thing there, guys. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about today, is the scale of the test. So again, this is going to be general review. We're going to spend some considerable time on the math section. We're going to spend some time on the writing and language section as well. Okay, I just sent you the test. Yeah, I just posted the solutions to the test. We'll go over the test tonight. So that April 2019 test was the one that was administered again last year in April. But here's what I want to talk about. So if everybody, that link that I just sent over, talking about the SAT scale. Okay, this is the most important thing. We always start with this in all of our classes. This is the single most important thing that you guys can understand about this test. That seems very dramatic. It is not dramatic at all. This is a very, very different test from anything that you guys are used to taking in school. Okay, in school, we start out with a certain score, right? We start out with, like, let's say you start out with 100, right? So it's a 100-question test, and let's say you miss 17 questions, so you get 83 out of 100, and then you get a B minus, right? And it is what it is. That is not how the SAT is graded. That is not how you want to think about the SAT. And that's a big thing, particularly for the students that we have that are very high-level students. It's hard to get over this idea of not challenging yourself on every question. So what we're going to talk about tonight, and hopefully you guys get a pretty good feel for it, we're going to try to give you guys an opportunity to see how this test is graded. So if you guys see the scale, for the most part, and again, it's not perfect, but for the most part, on all of the sections, if you guys look at the scale, and again, this would be, this is on page of that last link I sent over. It's down towards the bottom. It is on page 11. So if you guys scroll down to page 11, it says conversion tables, right? And we'll go through those conversion tables on page 11. Okay, what you guys will see more than anything else, and again, it's not perfect, but what you guys will see is that every single question that you get right? So it says the raw score here, right? You get a certain amount of questions. On the reading section, let's say you get 40 out of 52 questions. Okay, so if you look at the 40 out of 52, okay, if we look at that scale, can everybody confirm that they see that? If you look at 40 out of 52 on the reading section, you look at, what, a 3, so you're looking at 30, it says 31, so the SAT score, it says, is 31, okay? And then if you go down to 42 out of 52, this didn't really help my cause here, but you get a 320, right? So this is 31, is just add a 0, it's 310. You add that to the writing and language section, obviously that's, right, that's the total score. But what you guys will see is, generally speaking, it's not perfect, but generally speaking, every single question on this test is worth about 10 points. Every question that you get right is worth about 10 points. And to prove that even further, there's 153 questions on the SAT. The test is out of 1,600 points. Roughly speaking, 1,600 divided by 153 is about 10 points. So it's a true statement that I make. It's not perfect on every scale. I gave you guys a bad example there already to start. But the reason that this is so important to recognize is because, unlike this test where you get graded down starting at 100, right? You miss a question, you get less points. This test is how many points can you answer correctly? How many additional questions can you answer correctly? This is going to become a big, huge point on both the math and the reading sections, because those are the reading section in particular is very difficult. It's very dense. It's, for those that have watched our past videos, in my opinion, it's the single hardest section of any section on the ACT or the SAT, because you don't know what's coming, and I'm sure some of you guys can attest to that and feel that same way. Okay, but the thing I want to bring up is that every 10 points every question is worth 10 points. You guys, again, who in this group, who's listening right now that really wants to wake up on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and go and take a full-length SAT for 3.5, 4 hours? Most 16, 17-year-olds don't want to do that. You're going to wake up, it's 8 a.m. Saturday morning of all times, right? And they're going to make you go into a school that you've never been to before, in all likelihood, with students that you've never seen before, right? And there's this anxiety to it, like, whoa, what's that guy doing, right? And you're sitting close to people. All of that is adding to the stress and anxiety of this test. And so when you start to, if you have a bad reading section, as an example, let's say you're not a reader, that's not what you like to do, it's so easy to give up in the real thing. So you get to the writing and language section, you're like, you know what, that's not for me, whatever, I don't care if my parents are disappointed in me, I don't care if I'm disappointed in myself, I'm just done with this, I want to go hang out with my friends. I'm sure you guys have had that experience before in something that you've done, And I want you to remember that every time you get into that mindset, if you're on the math no calculator section and math is not your thing, most students don't know this, but the math no calculator versus the math with a calculator, you would know this if you've taken a lot of practice tests. If this one is really hard, generally speaking, if this one is really hard, this one is really easy. Okay, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the math. But if this one's really hard, this one's really easy. However, when students don't do well on this hard section, right, they get the math no calculator section and it's really hard, okay, and it's really hard, most students just start to give up, right? Most students give up and they're like, and you're tired, right? That's all going to happen. But then when you get to the math with the calculator section, if you don't come in with a positive mindset, there are 38 questions on the math with the calculator section, okay? So let's multiply that by 10. It's even more true of the math section. The reading has a little bit less than 10 points per question. The math is a little bit more than 10 points. But let's just use 10 as an example. Right? You're giving up, times 10. That's horrible math. You guys probably don't trust me now. No, I'm just kidding. 10, right? Times 10. If you guys go into the math with the calculator section with a bad attitude because you had a hard time on the math no calculator section, you're effectively sacrificing 380 points just because you're not giving it your maximum effort. Okay, I always start with this in our classes and everything that we do. I always start with this, and the reason for that is because if you want to go to Harvard, and I only use Harvard as an example because everybody knows Harvard. If you want to go to Harvard, the reason this test still means something to Harvard, everybody's always up in arms about like, well, this test isn't reflective. You can argue as long as you want about the content, and I won't argue against you about the content of the test and whether or not that's applicable to college. But what is applicable to Harvard is that on Saturday morning, Harvard has finals. So Harvard has finals from Monday to Saturday. And on Saturday morning, they'll take a 3.5-hour math final. And you'll just have a 3-hour math final. And and all classes in college are graded on a scale, very much like the SAT is graded on a scale. And you're going against the students in your class. It's not against the test. So if the whole class gets a 60%, for those that are taking AP tests, right, the AP classes right now, if the whole class gets a 60%, but the smartest student gets a 70%, then that 70% is effectively 100%, right? That's how a scale works. And so what Harvard knows is that regardless of whether or not the content is worthwhile, the fact that the Harvard student is going to sit there and just drive through this thing, be so focused that no matter how, maybe they didn't have their best no calculator section, they come back and they're like, you know what, if I didn't have my best no calculator section, I better come back and I better make up for it on the math with the calculator section, no matter how down I am, no matter how tired I am. Okay, does that all make sense? That is the single most important thing that you guys can remember as you take these tests. When I was a kid, I was very good at these tests. I was a very bad student. I didn't work hard enough. I didn't do a lot of things right. I was always distracted. It was the ultimate procrastinator, ultimate shortcuts. I took every shortcut you could take, and that doesn't work out well. Because guess what? Against the top students in the country, or even if you're just trying to improve your score, if you want to improve your score by 150 points, I don't want you guys to be going into this thinking like, well, geez, what do I have to do to improve 150 points? That seems astronomical. It shouldn't, right? If you want to improve by 150 points, you guys should think about it like this. I have 15 questions. I have to get 15 out of the 153 questions. I need to get 15 more questions right on my next test than I did on my last one. Where am I going to find those 15 questions? It could be on any section. But I'm going to memorize one concept a day in math, or I'm going to memorize one concept a week every day, or one every week. I just said every day. Every week I'm going to memorize one concept in math. And then over 15 weeks, if you just do that once a week, that's like 2 hours of work a week to memorize a concept that will come up on the test. 2 hours of work a week, if you do that diligently for 15 weeks, you've just improved your score by 150 points. And that's just on the math section, and that's just putting in 2 hours worth of work. The biggest misconception about this is that I have to take practice test after practice test after practice test. That will help you in some ways deal with the endurance aspect, but what will help you way faster and will motivate you so much more is if you take a practice test and then you sit there for like 3-4 hours, and I'm going to show you how to do that tonight. I don't want you guys probably doing that between now and Saturday's test, but there's a really good explanation and a really good thing that you guys can accomplish going into the tests in the future. Is that I want you guys to continue to work on sitting down and reflecting on, okay, what went well on this test and what went horribly. And whatever went horribly, I want you to phase that out of the next time you take the test, and I guarantee you guys will see a 15-question improvement. 150 points, and guess what? A 400-point improvement. We had a girl 2 years ago, and I kid you not, she started at like, let's say 950. I think she started at 950, and she improved to a 1500. She had a 550-point increase. It's the high. It's the most I think we've ever seen from a student. Okay, 550 points. But guess what? It had nothing to do, her natural test-taking ability, we hear this all the time, like, oh, I'm not a great test taker. She openly admitted that she was not a good test taker to start. But she refused to be denied. She refused to let that into her brain, and every week she came with the best questions. I would sit there and I would just listen to these questions, and I'd be like, man, that's pretty in-depth. The only way she was coming up with those questions is if she was really thinking about it every time she took a practice test. And so 55 questions later, 55 concepts later, she worked through it. She would be on every one of these reviews. She would be asking the exact same question. She would be asking all these great questions. And guess what? Her score went up by 550 points. She ended up with a 1500. She's at Cal Berkeley now, and she's killing it. She's crushing it. Okay, and again, it's so much more about that work ethic and that drive, that when you're feeling stressed and you're feeling tired, rather than giving in and rather than doing what I used to do as a kid, particularly in school, it would just be like, oh, woe is me. I want you guys to fight through it. I want you guys to be ready to go for that 4.5 hours, and then you guys can do whatever you want for the rest of Saturday. Is that cool? Does everybody get that? Is everybody good to go with that? I hope that gets you guys fired up, because if you do that, you can make up 10 questions just with the right attitude. If you go into the Saturday's test and you want to crush it and you want to do really well, I guarantee you can make up 10 questions just by thinking about it in that way. Does that all make sense? Can everybody just give me a thumbs up or that makes sense? Whatever you guys want to comment. Beyond any reading strategies or math strategies that we're going to do, particularly because we're only 2 days away, of course, doing more math review and that kind of stuff is going to help you in the long run. But between now and Saturday, the most important thing and the biggest improvement that you can make between now and Saturday is just going through every section with the most upbeat attitude you can have. Because again, generally speaking, if the no-calc section is hard, the calc section is easy, and most students never get a chance to really experience that easy calc section because they're so caught up with how hard the math no-calc section was, and they just don't give it their best effort on the easy math with a calc section. Okay? Just so important. I cannot stress that enough. I've been doing that. I've worked with over 1,000 students now in the last 6 years, between our virtual classes, between just all over the place in these reviews. Okay, and it is just so important that you guys come in with that right attitude. You guys will crush it. So just make sure you have that, and that seems to be as important as anything else on this test. Okay, so let's start with the reading section, guys. That's it for just my short pump-up speech, my fire-up speech between now and Saturday. But let's start with the reading section, okay? And I want to talk about the dynamics of the reading section because it's really important, okay? So the reading section, as you guys know, I just said this before, but the reading section I think is the single hardest section. Single hardest on the test. On ACT or SAT. I think this is the single hardest section on the ACT or the SAT. And part of it is because you can't really prepare. As you guys know, there's going to be a pre-1900s passage. For those that have taken practice tests before, there's a pre-1900s passage. On a Saturday morning, okay, on a Saturday morning at 8 a.m., a pre-1900s passage for a 16-year-old is like the worst thing that could happen. If this shows up, it's not going to show up first, but if this is the second passage that you encounter at like 8:25 in the morning on a Saturday, it's going to be really hard to stay focused. And it's your job to remember that, to be okay with that, and to work through it. So really what we're going to talk about the reading test today is the ability to read. So if again, this might not apply to you going into Saturday, there are a few little hints that I can help you guys with in terms of hard questions that won't take too much time to go over. But more than anything, it's going to be about diligently reading a pre-1900s passage. And can you stay focused that entire time? Okay, there are some good things, though, about the reading section. It has the most favorable scale. So for students, it has the most favorable scale by quite a ways. Okay? So if you guys are sitting there and you're wondering, like, man, I am just so out of this, right? Who's ever done the thing where they're reading, their fingers following along, and then they're just like out in space, and their finger gets to the bottom of the page, and like, yeah, I have absolutely no idea what I'm looking at. On a timed test, that's like the worst thing that can happen, where you're all over the place, and then, I wonder what that kid's gonna have for his snack when he's got the break, right? And then you're like, why is my finger at the bottom of the page, right? You can't have that on a timed test. So the thing that I want you guys to recognize, and again, going back to that April 2019 scale, I actually used it as my bad example. On the reading test, this is really the one section, unless you have a really hard math test, this is the one section where you can miss multiple problems and actually not lose points. Okay? As using, going back to my example, you can miss multiple problems and not lose points. And not lose points. So it's by far the most favorable scale for you guys. If you go back and you guys take a look at that, you can get 4. If you get 40 out of 52 questions right, or 41 out of 52 questions, it was still the same score, right? I think it was a 310, if I remember correctly. So that's the benefit to you guys. And really what it comes down to is, if you start to find yourself trailing off, where you're just like looking at something and you have no idea what you're reading, it is very, very, very important that you guys take a deep breath, even if it costs you 2 minutes. Take a deep breath. Try to regroup, try to re-engage. If you have to take a sip of your water bottle, I think that's allowed during the test sections. Maybe not. I don't know. It kind of depends on your proctor too. But if you can't take a water, if it's pretty strict, the proctor will let you know right off the bat if they care about you drinking water during the test. I think you can. But if you can, great, do that. Just take a deep breath and then re-engage with the passage. Because the worst thing that you can do is to start to get flustered. When you get to the bottom of the page, you forget what you read, you start to go to the questions, and you start to get flustered. That's the worst thing that can happen. If you take a deep breath and you waste 2 minutes, and then you have to guess on 2 questions at the end, that's not that big of a deal. The other thing that's really important about the reading section, guys, is that you recognize that every question, you get about 1 minute. You get about 1 minute and, 1 minute, I think it's in 20 seconds, 15 to 20 seconds. Let's just call it 20 seconds for right now. You get about 1 minute and 20 seconds per question. Now, you have to read the passage. I get that. But if you think about this from just 1 minute and 20 seconds per question, forgetting about the passage for a second, if you take a 2-minute break in the middle of the test because you're feeling overwhelmed, right, and you're feeling overwhelmed and you just don't want to be there anymore, if you take a 2-minute break, you're sacrificing, let's say, 2 to 5 questions. 2 to 5 questions. Okay, just because you have to read the last passage. Let's say 2 to 5 questions. That is not that big of a deal. Okay, you can still very easily get over a 700 on the reading, writing, and language section by just not answering those. You'll guess at the end. You'll probably get a few of those 2 out of 5 right. Let's say you get 2 out of 5 of those 5 questions right, even if you guess on 5. But what it will do is it will keep you from being flustered. And that's the most important thing. If you start jumping around in the reading section and start feeling overwhelmed, it's very, very easy on that section in particular, because the passages are so dense, to have a steep downhill slide. Right, where you just get totally overwhelmed, totally uncomfortable with the test, and it just becomes too much. Okay, does everybody get that on the reading section? The one type of question that I want to go over on the reading section, are those direct evidence questions. So citing textual evidence is what we call them, direct evidence. Okay. So the direct, and by the way, guys, feel free to ask any questions at any time. You guys are doing a great job commenting already. Feel free to ask any questions about any of this at any time. Even if we have to take a quick detour from what I'm talking about, that's totally okay. That's what the review is for. Okay? But what I really want to talk about in terms of question types, and this is really the only type of question we'll discuss tonight, is the questions that are direct questions. They deal with something immediately in the passage. So that's question 1. And then question 2, the immediate one after that, is the citing textual evidence. Right? Citing textual evidence. Right? Which says which line number, right? And it gives you line numbers as answer choices. Which line number corresponds to the previous answer? Line numbers as answer choices. Okay, line numbers as answer choices. Okay, so one of the things that I want you guys to do on these types of questions, and this is really important, because as you guys know that have taken practice tests, generally if you miss this one, right, if you miss this, right, you miss this. It's a double whammy. Okay, so generally if you miss the first one, you miss the second one. Okay? Guys, also going back to the 2 to 5 question example on the skipping 2 to 5 questions, if you have to skip more than that, that's totally fine. Okay, Miles, I just saw your comment there. 2 to 5 questions is fine. It can be 10 questions. It can be 12 questions. It's whatever amount of questions that you can answer to be focused on all. If it's 40 questions that you answer and you get 50 and you're looking to get the highest score possible, if you get those 40 questions right, you're going to get over a 700 probably you're going to get over a 300 at least, equivalent of a 300 on the reading section. Again, it's not, I don't know why they make you guys multiply it by 10 if you've ever graded your own test. They make you a 30, if you look at that scale, is the equivalent of a 300. They add that with the writing and language score, and that's how you get the 800 on the RWL section. Okay, if you guys have any questions about how that's scored, I'm happy to answer them. But if you have, no matter the number of questions you have to skip, it's just so important that you guys focus on accuracy above all else. But on these citing textual evidence questions, what tends to happen is we tend to miss this one, and then we miss this one. And that's a huge problem. One of the things that we've realized is the reason that students miss these questions a lot, well, first of all, these questions are hard. I'm sure you guys, for those that struggle with the reading section, I'm sure you guys recognize these are hard questions. Okay, but one of the other reasons that we recognize that students struggle with this is because they get too focused. So students get too focused on this question, on this part of the question. And then they get really involved with the reading, right? They get really in depth with the reading. So one of the things that I want you guys to do is I don't want you to miss, okay? I don't want you guys to miss the point of the first question. So before you go back into the text, see if you can answer this, right? See if you can answer this based on your thorough reading. See if you can answer without line numbers, right? Generally speaking, without lines. We talk a lot about without line numbers. Right, we talk about, in our classes, we talk a lot about thoroughly reading this stuff, right? I really want you guys to thoroughly read the passage. I promise, I know that there's different strategies in terms of like jumping from the questions back to the passage. That will work for some students, but the students that you've heard about that can get all the questions right doing that method, they could get the questions right no matter which method they use, to be honest. Okay, to be consistent on this test and not taking the one outlier student who's just an unbelievable reader, that's not me. I read all the time. This was probably, for those that have watched our videos, this is the section that I would feel naturally maybe most comfortable with. Okay, I'm a big reader, and I still wouldn't want to do that because it doesn't revolve around consistency. If you can only answer 40 questions right, but you can do those 100% accurately every time by reading the passage and understanding it, that's better than jumping around because you can see this big downhill slide. One time we had a student that got 49 out of 52 questions right on the reading test, and the very next test he got like 32 right out of 52. He had a 17 question slide because he was jumping to the questions before reading the passage. And that's what can happen because if you get one of those really hard passages, you run into this major problem of inconsistency, and if you have anything thrown off about the one passage, you can just see this big downhill trend. So I highly recommend you guys read the entire passage to answer as many questions as you can accurately, and then guess on as many as you need to at the end. And that corresponds right into this question, right? So question 1, see if you can answer the question without using line numbers. This section is called reading for a reason. They want you to read the passage. They want you to understand the passage just like you would have to do in a high-level class at Harvard or at Cal Berkeley or wherever you guys want to go to school. At any college, you'd have to read these passages and you'd have to read it to understand it. And if you do that, a lot of times these questions, these first direct questions, you don't even need these line numbers. You can just answer this question based on the main idea and the tone of the passage, right? And then if you can't answer it without going back to these line numbers, guess what? They give you the opportunity to go back and read this. And here's my recommendation. I would have you guys, because the line numbers are relatively close together, if you guys remember on these. So let's say it's lines, let's say it's lines 50 through 70. I would go back and don't look at which lines they want you to look at. Just read from the start of A, right, the first line number that they give you, to the ending line number, and see still if you can answer this first question correctly first. Okay, see if you can take all of these line numbers, answer this question, and then go back and decide which specific part of these lines made that question true. Again, this is a really effective strategy on probably the hardest types of questions on this test. And the reason that they're hard is, A, they're usually pretty hard questions to begin with, but if you miss one, you miss the other, generally speaking, and that's why they're really hard, is because it's that double whammy. Okay, it's that kind of the double negative, and we want to try to avoid that. Okay, so any questions on that, guys? This is by far, by the way, the most vague section in terms of like what we can provide you guys before Saturday, just solely because we don't know what the passages are going to look like on Saturday. I encourage you guys just to continue to read, to continue to become better readers as you keep going. But most importantly, see how well you can focus. See if you can really challenge yourself to sit down, and whether or not you're reading an SAT passage and answering questions, or you're just reading a book, see if you can sit down and read for an hour and 5 minutes without a phone, without anything close to you, and just see if you can read. For great readers out there, you guys can definitely do that. Okay, I love to read, and so that gives you a natural advantage. If you're not that person right now, see if you can get a little bit better each day. Read for 20 minutes, and then read for 30 minutes, and then read for 40 minutes. And again, going back to the first concept of how many questions, right? How do I get a little bit better each day? By the end of 20 weeks, you've all of a sudden knocked out 400 points worth of the test or whatever. Okay? Yeah, so, and then Miles, for questions that jump around in the passage, if they give you a line number within a certain question, and it's not these double questions, if they give you a line number within a certain question, so if they give you line numbers for specific questions, then just go back and read the context of that. We had another question, it looks like, about strategies. So let's talk about strategies for reading, how to be a good reader. Yes. Yeah, we had another couple good questions. Can you have specific strategies? If you guys jump to the evidence, like if you just jump to this line first and reread it, I'm fine with that. The key is just to reread these. So that was a great comment about finding it easier to jump to the lines first. That's fine too, as long as you go back and you reread those lines. Okay, and you reread them without reading them specifically to try to answer this question. You just reread them, and then you go back here and then answer this question just so you have a good understanding of this. Then yeah, effectively you're getting those direct hit questions, which are great, where you just answer it and you know it right away, which is great. Okay, then there was another question about strategies for reading, what to do while you read. Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Here are a couple things that you guys want to keep in mind. Okay, strategies as you read. First and foremost, quotations are always going to be important. I would circle, anytime you see quotations on the test, I would circle it. Okay? Circle it. It's going to probably come up within the answer choices or within the questions at some point. It's going to probably come up within the answer choices at some point. Okay? I would definitely circle or underline names of people that aren't the main idea. Names of characters not the main idea. Okay, and what I mean by that is if like there was a passage recently about the life of like Eleanor Roosevelt, for example. If the passage is about the life of Eleanor Roosevelt, don't circle Eleanor Roosevelt. It's going to keep coming up, Eleanor, right? Don't keep circling her name. If it brings up FDR, right? If it brings up FDR all of a sudden and it's just about one paragraph, circle his name because there's probably a relationship question about like, well, how did Eleanor and Franklin, reconcile their political differences, or whatever? And you can clearly see that would be a question within the 10 questions that you guys, or 10 or 11 questions you guys would see. So names of characters that are not the main idea. A lot of times you'll get like a scientific study where there is no name that's the main idea. So if they mention a scientist and his experiment as it relates to the science overall, then that person is probably going to be important, right? What did Madame Curie do to win her second Nobel Prize in chemistry or whatever, right? So that's really important. And then the third thing I would remember, guys, is that the passages on the SAT are only 90 to 110 lines, if that. Okay, so that's a super important fact to remember. Because if you're really reading for content and you trust your reading, you're really reading and you trust yourself, right? 10 to 11 questions per passage. Again, just do the math. That's what we're trying to focus on more than anything, is to make this test feel a lot less overwhelming. Okay, if you make this feel, if it's 90 to 110 lines, okay, right, and it's double spaced, there's a column here, it's really like 50 lines, 50 Word document lines for 10 to 11 questions. If you guys are really reading for content, that means that every 5 Word document lines, there's a question appearing. So again, if you guys want to annotate, it might take a little bit. Sometimes people like to annotate and write in the margins. If you've watched our videos, I don't do that, but I am very frequent about bracketing certain paragraphs that I find to be important to the overall story. But most importantly, if you're paying attention to what you're reading and you're focused on these 3 things, you guys are going to do a great job. That's scary. That's scary, man. We have everybody decided to watch online. We have 20 students online and nobody. It's just like, oh my god. So yeah, we're just starting on the reading section. Any questions, guys, on reading? Any other questions on reading? Move on to writing language. Writing language is going to be a quick one to talk about, guys. Can everybody who's had questions about the reading section, can you guys just give me a good to go? Just good to go, so I know that we can move on to the writing language section. Guys, yeah, so how do you solve main idea purpose questions? Guys, for the reading section, main idea purpose questions should be, you got to trust yourself. If you read the passage, if you guys really read the passage, the main idea purpose questions, you can trust yourself on those. I recommend you try it before Saturday, so just pull up a practice test. There's 10 of them online, right? College Board, just search practice test. And I try to read the passage untimed. One of the drills that we have our students do is we have them read untimed passages, so it's untimed, okay? And then we have them, so this is just a drill. Don't do this on Saturday. Don't quote me on doing this on Saturday. But we have them go to the questions and not read and not be able to go back. Now, again, this is just a drill. But if you guys really want to see how well you're comprehending a passage, okay, if you really want to see how you're comprehending a passage, whether or not you're really reading for content or if you're just worried about the questions and worried about time, do an untimed passage between now and Saturday, okay? And then you're not allowed to go back to the question. You're not allowed, when you get to the questions after you've read, you're not allowed to go back. You're not allowed to go back to the passage on any questions, including the ones that are like in line 40, what does this word mean? You don't even get to go back on those. You're really just focused on writing down the main idea, okay, and the tone of the passage. If the tone is, so main idea, right, just one sentence, you're focused on the tone. If the tone of the passage is positive, then the answer choices will reflect positive answers, right? If the whole thing is positive, it's talking about Eleanor Roosevelt and her success in helping women in politics, then there's not going to be a negative answer choice. Unless they're talking about a very, very specific point in the passage, and even then it's probably not going to be a negative answer choice. Okay? Yeah, so we just see how that, so yeah, underlining questions that involve tone is just so important. A lot of times we get so overwhelmed that we're looking at answers. If you just read through like 2 of the answers, again, I encourage you guys to watch our reading video. If you guys just read through the questions, a lot of times there's like 2 answer choices that reflect that they'll say like, they'll just have horribly negative tone words when the whole passage was positive. Those 2 answer choices can be immediately eliminated, immediately. And that's really, really effective for those main idea purpose questions, is if you just really understand it and you go through an untimed test and you challenge yourself to see how well you're really reading, and the best way to do that is not to be allowed to go back to any of the questions, to any of the reading. You have to answer the questions just based on what you remember. Don't do this on Saturday. This is just a drill. But if you do that, you're going to see really quickly whether or not you were really reading or if you were just reading to get to the answers, get to the questions. Is that cool, guys? Okay. One of the other things too, guys, I know I do want to make sure that we move on to writing and language because I know there's a lot of students that ended up wanting to talk about math. We won't talk about writing and language for too long just because it's by far the most straightforward. It's a lot about memorizing grammar rules. But one of the things I do want you guys to know is that if you guys have any questions, please comment. This video is going to be available to everybody immediately after this. Okay, so just comment on this video for any additional reading questions, or if you practice any of this stuff, please make sure you comment. We're happy to help. We always comment. If you've watched any of our other videos, we always comment and help students out. But we got to make sure that you guys are commenting so we know what to help you with, okay? So even as we move on, if you haven't had all of your questions answered, just comment on this video after, so I know what we need to look for. Okay, I know what we need to answer for you guys. Is that cool? So let's move on to writing and language. Again, I just want to make sure that we get through everything, and we have a math drill planned for everybody. Okay, at the end of this, so I just want to make sure we get through everything. Okay, so writing and language, guys, if there's one thing that you guys can accomplish between now and Saturday, it's likely on the writing and language section, specifically on one section. Okay, writing and language is largely about Okay, writing and language is largely about grammar usage. Grammar. Okay, and then we have some of those main idea and organization questions. Okay, like should the author add this sentence? Okay, between now, we actually were just talking about this with another student. Between now and Saturday, this is where you can make up the most ground in terms of improvement. Remember, the writing section has 44 questions on it, and it's worth effectively 400 points combined with the reading section. They are graded independently of each other. I went through this with a student in a virtual class that we did with a school in Colorado, and what we saw, we went through this test, and we saw that 9 to 11 questions out of these 44 dealt directly with punctuation. How to correctly punctuate when writing. Okay, and so again, this is probably the one section where everybody needs the least amount of help. It's going to be the one that's the least overwhelming for sure. When you go through the writing and language section, even if you don't do very well, it's not like there's not this overwhelming feeling, because everybody understands what's going on within this for the most part. And so there's not this overwhelming feeling. The flip side of that, the negative side of that, is that it gets us into a habit of not really analyzing every question, because we're just like, oh yeah, that's probably right. Right? I hear it because I speak, I hear it because I speak English with my friends every day, and I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds right, so I'm going to choose it really quickly without actually giving it full thought and full credit. Don't do that, right? Every question is worth 10 points. And the reason that punctuation, if I'm gonna memorize anything, and again, all of the punctuation section is available for free on our Star U app. Every single type of question and piece of punctuation that you guys can find, I would download Star U. I would create a student account. It is free. Click SAT. Okay, click SAT. On the next page, you'll see SAT writing and language. And then you'll see as another tab, you'll see punctuation. There's also a tab for a sentence structure quiz at the bottom. That will also deal with all punctuation questions, so sentence structure. I highly encourage you guys to have this ready to go, and that goes back to warming up. If you have the app ready to go on hand on Saturday and you're standing in line waiting to register, do warm-up problems. Think about this, just like you'd play a sport, or just like if you're in the play, or you're in math club or whatever. If you're competing, you want to make sure you're doing practice problems to get your brain warmed up before you get going, and punctuation is the best for this, because punctuation is 100% rules-based. So again, if you guys take an untimed, this is what I would recommend if there's one section that I would recommend taking in full between now and Saturday, it would be the writing and language section, and I would 100% do it untimed. And I would do really all of your writing and language sections going forward. I would do them untimed, trying to analyze every question. And the reason for that is because this is really the one section that I don't think anybody will ever have trouble with timing, at least by the end of it, by the end of your preparation. I don't think you'll have trouble with timing. So thus, it's that much more advantageous to really memorize these punctuation lesson problems and really make sure that you understand, like, when am I supposed to use a semicolon? When am I supposed to use a comma? There are very specific rules. So if you see a comma that's underlined within the question, right? If you see a comma that's underlined within the question, then you know, well, that comma can't just be there. There are rules for commas. So if I'm going to select the answer choice with the comma there, I know there has to be a rule, and I'm going to apply that rule. And that's what you can accomplish when you take an untimed writing and language test. You can really, really accomplish that in a really big way. So between now, again, 9 to 11 questions, if you go back on previous tests and you look at those 9 to 11 questions and you only got 2 of those right, you can make up 8 questions. That's worth 80 points. right? You get 80 points back if you just sit there and memorize punctuation rules between now and Saturday. Is that fun to do? Absolutely not. Do most 16-year-olds decide when they wake up, like, oh man, I can't wait to get to the punctuation lessons today? No, you don't think about that. But if you do it, that's 80 points. That's crazy. If you're at a really high level already, if you're at a 1400 plus and you missed 2 punctuation questions, 1400 versus 1420 is a big difference. You got to be thinking about these little things. The margin of error is slight, but if you get really good at this section, you're going to be in great shape. On top of that, as kind of a final point here, unless anybody has any questions, guys, does anybody have any questions in the writing and language section? Okay, on top of that, if you guys really get good at your grammar rules, so punctuation, like when I take the writing and language test, again, we have a video on this. When I take the writing and language test, I know all of my punctuation rules really well. So when I come to those questions, if I have 50 seconds per question, usually to answer those, I can answer all of those questions in like 10 seconds at most. And those are deemed pretty hard questions generally by the SAT, okay, by the College Board. So if I can answer those in 10 seconds, then when I come back to these main idea organization questions, the ones that are like, where should sentence 1 be placed, right? And you have to go back and actually reread, place sentence 1, all those kinds of things, right? Or should the author make this addition? In order to understand if he should make the addition or she should make the addition, you have to read the first sentence, then you have to read the second sentence, then you have to reread the first sentence, plug in the new point, the new sentence, and then reread the second sentence and see if it makes sense. So you understand the main idea. All of that takes time, but you gain so much time by just memorizing the 30 questions that are grammar related. You can just fly through these questions then, and then when you get to the main idea organization, there's no fear to go back and reread. Okay, so great. So yeah, we had a great question there, right? Part of the reason, so main idea and organization. So if you guys have a main idea and organization question, the first thing that I would do, let's say take an additions question as an example. Okay, let's take an additions question as an example. And actually, guys, can everybody open? I sent that document earlier. You guys will have to scroll up on the chat if you don't have it open already. But can everybody take a look at that April 2019 test that I sent over? Yeah, where did I put that? I had it in front of you. When we were working, did you see that? Oh, wait. Yeah, I had the. Give me one sec, guys. Can everybody confirm when you guys have that open? I'm just gonna pass out another one if I can find it. Everybody confirm that they have that open. Here we go. Yeah, so let's look at number 2 on the April 2019, that test that I sent over. Let's take a look at number 2. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So we just reread. So on those additions questions, guys, all you want to do is reread. Okay, so if you guys take a look at April 2019, right, here's how I would recommend doing additions and deletions questions, or even those where the sentence is now questions. Okay, if you look at number 2, question number 2, it says, let me see. Okay, question number 2 says, should the author make the addition here, right? Has everybody seen that? Okay, so if we read this, it says, on June 20th, 1965, murmurs of excitement filled the Kingston, Jamaica auditorium, where an unusually large crowd gathered for commencement services at the University of the West Indies. Along with the 400 graduates, many people had come to hear the words of that year's commencement speaker, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Okay, so you guys will see that before I stopped reading, right, I read the first sentence, okay, and then question number 2 asks about what should go in between those. I read sentence 1, I read sentence 2, the 2 sentences surrounding where the addition would go, right? The addition is going to go right in here somewhere. And I gained an understanding about what those 2 sentences were talking about. They were talking about the commencement speech of MLK Jr. in Jamaica, right? That was the main focus, and if you keep reading, that is the main focus. The addition that they want to make is talking about the university was established by royal charter in 1948. If the addition is not in line with Martin Luther King Jr. speaking in Kingston, Jamaica, then the addition should not be made. And it really becomes that straightforward and that simple if you read those two lines for the main idea, right? And then you see if the addition should be made after. So you read sentence 1, then sentence 2 without the addition. You figure out what they're talking about. Then you read sentence 1, put the addition in, and see if it makes any sense with what the main idea was that you just figured out. Now that takes a little bit of time. And that's where, if you memorize all the punctuation rules, and again, they all can be found on that Star U app. If you memorize all of those punctuation rules, we'll have plenty of time to come back and really reread and comb through these main idea organization questions. Okay, does that all make sense? So the answer there would be no, and it should be no because, yeah, what? No because needless to interrupt. Yeah, perfect. It's C, right? Alvi, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so that's exactly right. That it's C because and again, those questions are super straightforward compared to the reading section and the reading comprehension that goes along with the reading section. Those are wildly easy, and it just takes time. You have to be okay by question number 2, really taking your time. And if you take enough of these practice tests and you've memorized your grammar rules, you will be just fine going back, right? You'll be just fine making sure that you spend enough time on those types of main idea organization questions. Is that cool? Any questions there for anyone? We'll talk about the math section, which is probably what everybody's waiting to get to. I don't think it's that everybody struggles with math. I think it's that it's the one section. There's 2 things that go into the math section. There's 2 things that go into the math section. Yeah, we can go over number 3, guys, here in just a second. But there's 2 things that go into the math section that make it so hard. One, it's at the end of the test. You guys it's exhausting to be that focused for 2 hours before you take a math test. It's definitely the one, and then the fact there's a no calculator, we'll get into that in a second, but the fact no calculator is first overwhelms everybody, and like we talked about earlier tonight, if you find one question that's a little overwhelming, and you're tired and you're stressed and you're anxious and you just want to get out of there, it's really easy to see a downhill slide. So it's not as much that it's the hard, it's actually way, way easier in the ACT math section. But when it's at the end and you don't get a calculator and you're not used to that environment, it's really easy to go downhill pretty quickly. Okay, yeah, let's take a look at number 3. Yeah, number 3, guys. If you read number 3, if you properly choose transition words, so any of these main idea organization questions, again, read sentence 1. So this main idea transition, right? Read sentence 1, read sentence 2. Okay, without any transition words in them, because just like you're not going to have an additions question, read sentence 2, and then come back, reread sentence 1, and plug in each of the transition words, knowing what's coming already. Plug in, right? Plug in transition words, knowing what's coming in sentence 2. Okay? Does that all make sense, guys? Eli, does that make sense? Alvi, does that make sense? So hopefully everybody sees here that you don't need a transition here. Sometimes no transitions are best. It kind of leads into the final point that I want to talk about with these writing and language questions. Guys, if you're ever in doubt on the writing and language section, can everybody please write this down? Because this is also going to be really applicable for what we talk about here on math in just a second. If you're ever in doubt on any question on this test, find the simplest answer. Find the simplest answer. And a lot of times we don't need stuff. So that includes comma usage, right? Semicolon usage. Unless you know the rules for semicolons, don't just choose it to choose it unless you're acknowledging that it is a complete yes. But you don't need semicolons except for in one very, very specific place in when you write a paper. There's one very specific place. 99.9% of sentences you write will not need semicolons. So don't assume that you need it. In fact, there's about 4 to 5 questions. Great, Eli, thank you. Yeah, that's great. There are about 4 to 5 questions on every test that have a semicolon, and only one of those is generally right. Okay, and that's a perfect example of what they're trying to do. They're seeing if you really know the semicolon rule, if you're just choosing it because you're like, oh, I forgot about that in 6th grade when Mrs. Smith was talking, and I can't remember now, so I'm just going to choose it because it's the one I see the least. Is that cool? Eli, guys, Albie, those are great questions about this section. Those are great questions. Okay, I'm glad that makes sense. It's a great question. Okay? So let's, is everybody good? Just generally, again, guys, if you guys have further questions about the April 2019 test, that's actually also the test that the reason I sent it to you guys is because that's the same one that we do the videos on. So we have all 4 of the sections for the video. So I encourage you guys, for specific questions, I encourage you guys to go back and re-watch some of those videos, and go through it. But let's get into the math section now. It's a great question, though, Eli. Great question. Okay, so let's get into the math section, guys. This is going to be super, super important. Okay, so the math section here is comprised of 2 separate sections, and it's really important to acknowledge that early on. Okay, it's really important to acknowledge that early on. Okay, what's the key with the math sections? What's the first section? No calc. Is that good or bad?
It's not great.
It's not great, right? Dia just said it in here, guys. See, if you heard her, she said it's not great. The reason it's not great is because most students are not used to this. It's like when you take, for those that are in pre-calc, calc A, or calc A, B, C, whatever, right? When they start making you do limit derivatives without a calculator, everybody freaks out. And it's really not that hard, but because we're not allowed to use a calculator and there's no shortcut, which all of us are so used to now, it makes us, and that's what the SAT wants to see. But here's what I want you guys to remember, particularly for Saturday, and it goes back to what we talked about initially. There are 20 questions on the math calculator no calculator section, and there are 38 questions on the math with a calculator section. And if you guys take a look at that score report again, there are 58 total questions. And guess what, guys? These are just combined. So if you have a math no calc section that's really hard, that's only 1/3 of the overall score. And again, what we see from students all the time is they come out of the no calc section and they're like, man, that was so hard. I never want to see this test again. Get me out of here. And that negatively affects this section, which is actually worth twice as many points. Every question between the 2 sections is worth the same amount. You guys can see that's worth 58 total points. Every question is worth the same amount of points. So this negatively impacts something that's worth twice as many points. And I think that the SAT lays it out for you like that, as unfair as this might sound. I think they lay it out for you like that intentionally. Okay, I think they do that intentionally. And that stinks. Because they want you to in some ways, they want you to be affected by this. Okay, they want you to be affected by this. Okay, certainly, guys, from a strategy perspective, what I'm about to say, for those that haven't been in our classes, this is the most beneficial for the review. Okay, what I'm about to say on the math section, this is without doubt the most beneficial in the review. So, on the math section, I want to talk about what we call the 3-pass method. What we're talking about with 3-pass method. The key to understanding this test is that there are no points like you have in school where you get 7 points for a question or you get partial credit. That is the key. If you miss a question, you miss it. If it's a simple mistake, that is a missed question. So the worst thing that we can do is miss a question that we absolutely know how to do, and we're just going too fast because we're worried about the rest of the test. So the most important strategy, for those that are watching, the most important strategy that we want to talk about tonight is what we call the 3-pass math method. 3-pass. Okay, 3-pass math method. And with the 3-pass method, what we're really trying to accomplish is I want you guys to go through, so let's take the no calc section and we'll do this together here in a second. Okay, I want you guys to go find the easiest questions. Find the easiest questions and answer only those questions first. Okay, find the easiest questions. Find the easiest questions and answer only those questions first. And answer only those first. Okay, and I'm saying let's take the math no calc for example. There are 20 questions. It is very advantageous for you guys to go questions 1 through 20, skipping any hard questions. Skipping not only hard, but skipping any word problems as well. Skipping hard or time-consuming questions. Questions that, like if you have a bunch of words, guys, if you're struggling with the math section, this is so important. If you have questions that have a whole bunch of words, right, there's a high likelihood that you can make a simple mistake on those questions. So you want to skip those. And the reason you want to skip those is even if you only get, so out of these 20 questions, if you go through this first pass right? On the first pass, if you go through those questions and you only get 8 out of 20 questions right, because you're skipping them, it's not like I'm asking you never to come back to those questions. What I'm really asking you guys to do, okay, perfect. So Albie, that's perfect. So anybody that, I love that. So Albie just commented, I used the 3-pass method on May 2019 and got everything right. That's perfect. It's going to work every time because it gives you so much confidence. I'm not asking you guys to never go back to the questions that you skip. I want you to go back to those. In fact, on this April 2019 test, there are some early questions that are actually should be skipped early on. Because if you get 8 out of 20 questions right and you just fly through those and you don't make simple mistakes because they're really easy, really straightforward, right? You still have to be aware of the questions. You can't just go so fast that you're not answering them appropriately. But if you use this and you get 8 questions right, and because this is going to be where you're tired or you're feeling a little overwhelmed, you're going to have all of the incentive in the world to keep trying hard. And when you get to those harder questions or those more time-consuming ones, the ones that make you think, it's so much easier to do. Let's say you get 9 out of 20 right on this second pass. It's so much easier to do that when A, you've made time. I guarantee you make up time here. I encourage you guys to watch our videos. You've made up time in this sense, okay? And on this second pass, you have so much more momentum. And if you guys have to miss, right, if you have 17 out of 20, if you have 17 out of 20 right going into pass 3, right, where I encourage you guys to guess on questions that you have. If you have no idea, if you've never seen a logarithm problem before, don't do a log problem, right? If you're not at that point, don't do a log problem. Or if you're not good with the unit circle, don't answer the unit circle question. Don't spend any time on that because that question is worth the same amount of time that the other 17 questions are worth. That's where you're giving up time on a question that you don't know how to do and sacrificing potential accuracy on the ones you do know how to do. And that's where we run into a lot of trouble. Yeah, so that perfect, Albie, you used it perfectly then. You just said in the comments, for those that don't see it, it says, word problems hurt my brain, so skipping them and coming back to them after I recovered helps me. This 8 out of 20 is the recovery process. When you don't have to think through, like if it says 7x plus 20 equals 15x, and you don't have to think about that for very long, you're going to get that question right, and you recover, just like you said. So when you come back to those word problems, you're like, man, I can do really well in this test. And then on these 17 out of 20, if you guess on one more of those, right, you guessed on the last 3, you're going to get one of those right in all likelihood if you just guess the same letter down. That's now 18 out of 20. That's like a very, very, very strong score. Yeah, you feel like you're crushing it, right? Makai, that's right. That's exactly right. Okay, that's exactly right. You feel like you're crushing it. You're like, man, this is easy. And then you come out of the no-calc section like, that wasn't very bad. That's the best I've ever done. It's based on a computer science method for those that are thinking about becoming computer science majors. In computer science, we have a thing that's called sorting. It's called a sorting algorithm. Okay, and it's basically you have different levels of boxes for those that have coded or taken computer science classes before. You have different level of boxes, and your brain is trying to find the easiest boxes first and sort those out. And then you're trying to find the medium boxes next and sort those out. And then you're trying to find the hard boxes and sort those out. And you're trying to put them into categories. Trust me, guys, when you make these jumps like this on the test, which is just what, look at this. Ready? 1 pass, 2 pass, 3 pass. I wrote into my own writing. If you make those jumps, first going like this, and having to make those leaps and bounds every time, I guarantee this will feel very, very, if you work on this, if you get good at this, I guarantee you will crush this test, this math section, because the SAT math concept stuff is way, way, way easier than the ACT, and it's just all about Algebra 2 and pre-calc review. There's a few trig questions, a few geometry questions here and there, but it is largely about how well you know how to factor, how well you know y equals mx plus b, all that kind of stuff. I guarantee if you make these jumps rather than just jumping and then straining your brain on hard word problems when there's 2 or 3 easy questions still left to come, right? That is why it's just very, very impactful. The thing I think 16 and 17-year-olds don't understand about the test more than anything is when you get into that environment and you're 2.5 hours in and you come across a hard word problem and you don't have your calculator, that is a very, very, very big momentum shift. Right, where you're just like, where you just drop your shoulders and you don't want to do it anymore. That is our ultimate detriment. no question on the test is hard enough for us to have drop our shoulders. So if we have that moment and we just lose all momentum on the test, it is going to be really hard to regain that, and it's going to be really hard on the math calculator section. And ultimately, that tends to be the easier section, and it's worth twice as many points as the no calc section. It's way more about wanting it. It's about focusing and only looking at the questions that you know how to answer first. Yeah, so word problems, guys, I would look for numbers. It's a great question, Albie. I'd look for numbers. If you're doing word problems, look for the numbers within the word problem first, and then look for variables. A lot of times what they'll do on word problems is they'll give you variables. Like they do these temperature problems a lot, like boiling points, right? Has everybody seen those types of questions? Just look what the variables equal. Because a lot of times they're talking about some like ridiculous reaction that doesn't matter at all. But they'll just say like H. All right, Dia, we were just looking at this one. They'll say like whatever equals something equals this. H equals some variable. Albie, what I would do on those word problems is I would try to write out your variables like H equals heat or whatever, height, something. Write out those variables on your paper, and so you can stay organized. A lot of it is about just staying organized on those harder word problems so that your brain isn't, again, the hard part about word problems when you're tired is that you're just trying to comprehend so much stuff. You have to read, and then you have to do math, and you have to read. A lot of it is just about taking a deep breath and just trying to organize or trying to organize in a very organized manner. Trying to organize in a very easy way, I guess. That's horrible grammar, but horrible word choice. But yeah, hopefully you get the answer. And so guys, the big takeaway from this lesson, and I hope that everybody's okay with this, if you guys take a look at that April 2019 test, this is what we're going to do together today. I can't stress how important the math no calculator section is, not from a I got to get every question right standpoint, but rather from a I don't want this to affect me in any major way point. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay, if I was a better streamer, if I was like a video game player, I think we could pull up this test onto my screen, but because I'm not, because I don't understand that well enough, I'm just going to have you guys pull up the test yourselves. Tia, you have that in front of you? Yeah. And we're going to go through this together, guys. Okay, and I want to show you guys what I'm talking about. Okay, if you guys have seen our video on this, you guys will be able to follow along quite well. But let me show you what I'm talking about when I say this pass 3 method. Is everybody following along? How's everybody feeling? Does everybody understand this pass idea? This skipping questions? Albie, if you want to be an advocate for us, I'd love it if you can continue to comment on how it worked for you on the May 2019 test. I'd love it, only because it really does work. This isn't just me saying it. It works on the videos. I promise it will work. So let's go through this together, guys. Okay, so let me give you guys an example. On the first page of the April 2019 test, and this will happen on the real thing too, right? On the first page, every single one of those, in terms of like brain strain and not overthinking it, every single one of those questions looks very easy except for question number 1. So don't do question number 1, right? Watch how quickly, who's got a timer? Do you have your timer on your phone? Yeah. Watch how quickly we can go through questions 2 through 5 without having any thought process. Like you just see that and you know that you have to add variables, right? So like number 2 says, which expression, right? And you just have 2x plus 6 plus x squared plus 2x, right? They're just looking for us to add those together, and as long as we don't make a very easy mistake, right? This just becomes 2x plus 6 plus x squared. Because there's not a minus sign here, everything just stays exactly the same, right? Plus 1. We just combine like terms, don't make simple mistakes, right? We get x squared plus 4x plus 7. Answer choice D. That took how long? 29. That took 29 seconds. So we're way ahead of time. You get 1:15 per question, and I'm even erasing. For those that saw the video, this happens on the video too. Number 3, f of x, right? All of these are questions that you guys have seen multiple times before. F of x equals 2 times x minus 1 plus 2. They're looking for f of 1. If you guys remember this from functions, you just go plug that back in, right? 1 minus 1 equals 2, or plus 2 rather. Right, we're plugging that in for the x value. Okay, so we get 2 times 0 plus 2. The answer is then 2. So the answer choice B. How long? What are we at? 26 seconds. They're talking at 26 seconds now. So 29 seconds, 26 seconds. I haven't thought about these questions at all. You could just repeat these questions over and over again. Number 3 is a little bit harder, but because it's y equals mx plus b, we should be familiar with it. One thing that you guys should remember, with y equals mx plus b, do you keep the timer going? Let's see how long it takes even talking about this stuff. Y equals mx plus b. Most students just think about this as the y-intercept. I highly encourage you guys to look at the lines section, lines, or linear equations section within the app. It's very important. Linear equations, if we look at this, if you guys look at b, that's actually at 0, 3, right? If you think about the y-intercept, it's actually 0b, where x is 0, right? And y is equal to whatever the y-intercept is. And so right away, we know that the m equals 2, and this might take some review, but it's so straightforward, and the b is equal to 3. So the answer is just y equals 2x plus 3. If you don't know that right now, that's okay, but that's an easy one to go back and review. And again, we've had no thought. No matter how tired you are at this point, it's late at night. I appreciate you guys staying up with me, right? It's late. You're probably tired right now. We haven't strained our brain on any of this, particularly if you are really good with y equals mx plus b. Okay, same thing with the next question. Okay, same thing with the next question. The square root of x plus 4 equals 12. Don't make simple mistakes, right? Minus 4, the square root of x is equal to 8. Square both sides, x is equal to 64. How long did that take?
It's been a minute and 17 seconds.
It's been a minute and 17 seconds for questions 4 and 5, and I actually wrote out and explained how to do question 4. And you have a minute 15 per question. So we're at a minute and 17 seconds, and we should have had 2.5 minutes. And we went through it. I'm not even going to come back to number 1. I don't want to think about number 1. So I'm going to go on to the next page. Keep it going. Okay? Number 6, right? Same thing. We just don't want to make a simple mistake, but everything's straightforward there. 7 times 2x minus 5 minus, now be careful, we don't want to make a simple mistake there. Minus 2 times 2x minus 5, right, is equal to 4 times x plus 5, right? All of that is very straightforward. Just distribute 14x minus 35 minus, now be careful, the negative 2 goes into both, right? So it's negative 2 times both, so minus 4x. Okay, and then that was minus 5, right? So now we get plus 10, because it's negative 2 times negative 5, is equal to 4x plus 20. Okay, so now we get 10x here. We're going to combine like terms. 10x minus 25 equals 4x plus 20. Plus 25 minus 4x on both sides, we get 6x is equal to 45. If you guys look at the answer choices, it can't divide by 6, right? X is equal to 15 over 2 if we divide both by 3. How long, what are we at?
2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Okay, 2 minutes and 30 seconds total for the last 3 questions?
Yeah.
Okay, 2:30 for the last 3. And again, we're not overthinking it. If you guys don't understand number 7, don't worry about 7 right now, okay? Let's look at question 8, because 8, guys, 8 is the most simple question that you'll see on the test. It is just about reworking variables. Okay, so question number 8 says v is equal to m over d. So anytime you guys see these types of questions where they give you the equation at the top, and then they want you to rework the expression so a different variable is on the equal side by itself, all we have to do is rework it. And so don't skip a step here, right? We cancel the d, right? D times d over 1. And then we have to multiply on this side as well, times d over 1. So we get d times v is equal to m. Okay, now we're looking for d to divide by itself, so we're going to divide by v. D is equal to m over v. The answer would be B. What's our time?
3:30.
3:30. So at 3:30, plus like the minute that we had on those first 2, at 3:30 we've skipped 2 questions. So at 3:30 we've gotten 6 questions right that I would almost guarantee. Now I'm gonna sound like an idiot if I got any of those wrong, but I think we got them all right. So we're 6 out of 8, 3 minutes and 30 seconds into the test, and I haven't overthought any of these questions. They are so straightforward. Look at number 9. I definitely want to skip number 9. I have no idea where that question could go. So skip number 9, and look what happens on 10. Okay, look what happens on 10. On 10, we have the exact same question we just got, except it's a little bit different, right? It's a little bit harder because they give us a few harder variables. 1/2 squared is equal to m times g times h. But then it says, which of the following is equivalent to velocity? So if you ever see equivalent to velocity, it just means they want you to get v equals something on one side of the equation. Okay, so again, all we're doing is trying to get v by itself. So we're going to divide by 1/2 over m, 1/2 divided by m, divided by 1/2, right? Okay, so this m is going to cancel, that 1/2 is going to cancel. This m is going to cancel, that m is going to cancel. Be careful on this. So we get v squared is equal to g times h over 1/2. If you divide something, you flip the second number and multiply. So g times h divided by 1/2 is equal to g times h times 2 over 1. So we get v squared is equal to 2gh. V is equal to the square root, right? Square both sides. V to 2gh. What's the answer there? So number 10, which is supposed to be a pretty hard question, is C. And again, I haven't overthought anything. Just because I knew that they were trying to get us to rework the equation. Okay, I don't like number 12 at all. I am horrible with the quadratic formula. My mom's a longtime math teacher. She would kill me to hear me say that. Longtime math teacher. I've tutored math for a long time. I'm very, very willing to admit and not too proud to admit that I have no idea off the top of my head the quadratic formula. I could probably come up with it, but it's not one it's gonna help me. I'm gonna strain my brain. I don't want to look at that question. Okay. On the flip side, though, I rock right triangles. I just love right triangles. So I'm as bad as I am at number 12. I'm equally as good at number 11. So I'm gonna look at number 11. That might flip for you. In fact, we had a student, Gia, I don't know if you're watching here, but we had a student yesterday who was talking. She just rattled off the quadratic formula in like 2 seconds, and she knocked that question out of the park, got it right, and it's not one that I would have even looked at. Okay, so it's going to change depending on who you are. Number 11 says, right, they give us this triangle. Watch out for these questions, guys. Anytime you're given 60 degrees, x equals 60, it's definitely a 30, 60, 90 right triangle. If you guys know that this is 30, 60, 90, if you flip to the formula section at the beginning, they give you 30, 60, 90 right triangles. If you've memorized it, right, they're asking for A and B. If you've memorized it, AB equals 8. How long did that take? Honestly, if I looked at that question, because I'm so familiar with 30, 60, 90 right triangle, if I looked at that question, it probably takes less than 10 seconds to get that one right. Because 30, 60, 90 right is x, 2x, and x root 3. And I'm not too proud to admit that as quickly as I could answer that question, I would equally be as bad at number 12. So I'm going to skip 12. I'm going to skip 13. That could go in a million different directions. I'm probably going to skip 14. And I'm going to skip 15 for right now. Okay, so let's go to the next page, 16. Okay, if we look at 16, question 16, which is the free response questions. Okay, question number 16 is the graph of the function. I like graphs of functions. And guys, remember that if you guys are ever struggling on some of those higher level, like 11 through 15 multiple choice questions, if you guys are ever struggling on those questions, remember that it resets. So number 16 is easy again. So remember the test gets an order of difficulty. So 1 through 15 is an order of difficulty. Theoretically, their questions are getting harder. And then 16 through 20 is also an order of difficulty. So 16 and 17 are going to be relatively straightforward, so you can reset. If you're struggling with questions 10 through 15, reset, skip all of those, kind of like what we just did, even though we got a lot of those 1 through 15 right. You reset and you go to 16. And now all of a sudden it says the graph of the cubic function is shown in the plane if f of a, right, f of a is equal to 0, where a is a constant, what is one possible value of a? So it's saying f of a, right, this is just where is y equal to 0? So x equals what when y equals 0? I really like graphs of functions, so I'm going to answer this one. When x is what when y equals 0? It could be 2, right? If you look at that graph on number 16, it could be 2, it could be 4, or it could be 8. And that's the right, and that I'm positive that's the right answer. And there will be questions, guys, on the SAT free response that you could have multiple answer choices. So 2, 4, or 8, any of those, if you fill those out, would work for that question. So that's number 16. Say that again? Yeah, you may have taken it. It's a common one. It's also the one that we do for the video, so that's probably where you've seen it. Okay, number 17, guys. Anytime you see this, what is the value of a? These are also great questions. So great questions in the sense that you want to answer them. Okay, so this one says 3x squared plus 5x plus 4. Guys, if you ever see this, and they give you a bunch of stuff on the left, right? They say 5 times x plus a, and it looks way more complicated than it is, and these are very common types of questions on the test. 3x squared minus a. Just start distributing. Start by doing what you know. So you get 5x plus 5a, right? Plus 3x squared minus 3a. Well, geez, that looks pretty similar, right? If we line all this up, we get 3x squared plus 5x plus 5a minus 3a is plus 2a. And on the other side, look at this. We get everything is exactly the same. And then we get plus 4. So if these are equal to each other, it must mean that 2a is equal to 4. So a must be equal to 2. Okay, and guys, then I'm going to stop there. So that's it. So that's my pass 1, right? Does everybody see that? Dia, what's our time right now?
10:12.
10:12, guys. Can anybody, of those questions, how many questions did I just answer? Anybody online, can you guys tell me how many questions we just answered? We have 25 minutes on this test, 25 minutes. I didn't think about any one of those. Now, granted, if you guys have seen our video, you know that I've seen that test before. The best part about the SAT, though, is all of the concepts just continually repeat themselves. That one that's like D equals M over V, they're just going to change the variables and slightly change the equation, and I guarantee it shows up on the next test. If you just remember how to rework the equation, you're going to be just fine. I think there was like 10 of them. I'm going to guess it was 10. Guys online, how many of those do we answer?
11.
Was it 11? And we had 10 with 10:15, you said?
Yeah.
10 minutes,
Or 10:12.
10:12. 10 minutes, 12 seconds is how long it took us to answer. And I think this was true even in the video, which was the first time I had seen this test. Okay, even in the video, I think it was right around the same amount of time. And all the concepts are going to show up. So if you just answer the easiest questions, you're looking at having 15 additional minutes. You have 15 minutes now to go back and answer 9 or 10 questions. You get time and a half for those questions. Okay, you got 10. So 10, you have 10. Now you have for 15 minutes, you have 10 questions left. And some of the questions we skipped were at the very beginning. I'm not disputing that those were probably pretty easy questions, right? We can always go back to those. So now you go all the way back to question number 1, which was a word problem that I said we should skip. And you do question number 1, which is going to be really easy, and you keep on this roll. And then by the end of this, the only questions that you would even have to skip, that's the best part about this, is that if you effectively use this method, the only questions that you have to skip, right? The only ones are questions that you already said you deemed them to be the hardest questions on the test. It's the ones that you read through and you didn't know how to answer them. Deemed to be the hardest. Right? So you're maximizing, again, using this method, which is what computer science really theoretically, right, is all about. Using this method, this 3-pass, you're only dismissing, you're only guessing or not thinking about the hardest questions to you. And that's going to change for everybody. I don't know the quadratic formula. I know 30, 60, 90 right triangles like the back of my hand. I can't remember the quadratic formula to save my life. So I don't answer question number 11, and I do answer question number 10. Or 11 and 12, whatever the numbers were. It's that straightforward. Does that make sense to everybody? Is everybody feeling okay about that? Guys online, everybody good? Do you feeling okay? If you do that on Saturday, if you just go back and you keep these words, if there's anything that I can leave you with tonight, guys, I would have you write this everywhere you can. Nope, I said write it everywhere you can. I didn't even say what I wanted to say. Keep it simple. Right? Something like that. Or find the easy questions. Write that at the top of your math test. Find the easy ones. If you stick to that and you only answer to start out, you only answer the questions that you feel really strongly about, and you write it at the top of your test, you guys are going to dominate this thing. You will dominate. You will maximize your score every time. Okay? So Alvi, yeah, let's go over question number 20 real quick. Yeah, 20 is a really hard question. This is like again, I think in the video even, this was the one that gave me a lot of trouble. We'll go over 20 quickly and then move on. Can everybody give me a thumbs up or say this all makes sense? Everybody online, can you guys give me some positive or negative comments, just so I know everybody's getting this? Albie, question number 20 looks like this. If you remember the circle equation, we know that based on the circle equation, the The center of the circle is at 6, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's the center of the circle. And then they give us that the radius is the r squared, right, is equal to 25. So I encourage you guys, if there's anything that you guys should do between now, x minus h plus y minus k. One thing that you guys can do between now and Saturday is to memorize the circle equation. Okay, where h and k are the center of the circle on a coordinate plane, and r is equal to the radius. Okay. If you look at this, then Albie, the radius is equal to 25, or the radius squared is equal to 25. If you go like this and you get the point down here, it means the circle looks like this, effectively, right? And they want you to move this thing down so that some piece of the circle is a tangent line to the x-axis, right? A tangent line to the x-axis. The problem is that the bottom of the circle is already below the x-axis, so you actually have to move this point up here. So you're at 6, 3 at this point, right? And this point then would be 5 units up. So this point up here is at 6, 9, right? And so you have to move this down so that this is touching the x-axis. You have to move it down 9 units. Is that right? No, man, that's horrible math. 3 plus 5 is 8, right? You have to move this down 8 units for this point to be even with the x-axis, right? And then the new circle looks like this, something like that. And now you have a tangent line. But the confusing part is the fact that the bottom is already below the x-axis. And so you have to visualize that. It's tough. That's a really hard question, though. It's a good one to go over. Okay? Guys, the same exact, Albie, can you just give me does that make sense? Can you give me a thumbs up? Guys, the same exact question is going to show up, the same exact concepts and strategies will show up in the math with a calculator section as well. Okay? They're all going to be the same. So everything we just went through in terms of the strategy is something that I want you guys to go over and I want you guys to keep working at, okay? Does that all make sense? That all make sense? Okay, any questions, guys? Anybody have any questions? We're not going to go through the calculator section is the same, right? The calculator section is, I don't want you guys to think about concepts too much tonight, just because it's, or even over the next 2 days. There's really, realistically for math, there's not enough time, unless you're just going to memorize formulas. Wait, Albie, sorry, let me see. Oh, because it says it, right, Albie? It says it translated downward. It's a good question. You otherwise could, but in the question it says you can translate it downward. Should have read that. I should have read that out loud. Sorry. I just knew that. I remembered that question because I remember I struggled. I had to take a second. But that's where that extra time, I had built up extra time by not worrying about harder questions. So because I had built up extra time, I was able to answer that. I spent a little bit more time on question number 20. But I knew that you had to translate it down. So that's a good question, though. Okay. So again, guys, the math with the calculator section is going to be the same. It's going to be just as I would use the exact same method. There's going to be 1 through 30 questions, right? You're going to have 30 questions on the math with calculator. Okay, math with. Okay, and then there's going to be 31 through 38. There's going to be those student-produced responses. As you guys get to harder questions here, right, as the questions get harder, if you need to reset, and this is going to be particularly important because it's going to be at the end of the test. It's going to be at the end when you're starting to feel really tired and really anxious to get out of there. Go down and start some of these questions to reset your brain, right? Because 31 should be pretty straightforward. Really, 31 through 34, 35, right, are usually pretty straightforward, or at least some combination of those. Go down to those and reset, right? Reset and get some questions right so that you get back on that roll. Okay, does that make sense, guys? Okay, any other questions overall? Any other questions overall? Any general questions? Again, I highly encourage you guys to warm up on Saturday morning. We'll try to send out a notification on your phones if you've downloaded the app. We always try to send out a notification on Saturday morning to remind you to do a few reading problems. It's within the app. So if you guys are standing in line getting ready to check in, we want to send you a reminder to be doing practice problems to get your brain thinking about reading. A really easy way to accomplish this warm-up is by doing those writing and language problems, because it kind of knocks out both the reading section in terms of getting your brain reading stuff, as well as doing some grammar questions to get warmed up. So I encourage you guys to do it that way if you can. Okay, so any other general questions, guys? If not, usually this ends a little bit early, but feel free to ask any questions. This now for the next. Well, I'll stay on for 25 minutes if we need it. But if it's specific questions to you, or just about strategy or anything, everybody else, that's kind of the end of the review in terms of what I have to offer. If you guys want to. You want to stay in and listen to anybody that has additional questions, you can. If there's no additional questions, then great. Good luck on Saturday. I hope you guys do super well. And if you guys have any questions for me between now and then, you definitely can answer. Just comment on this video. But if there are additional questions you want to get out of here because it's getting late, you definitely can. Otherwise, I'll be on for like the next 25 minutes. And yeah, and you guys will be good. Yeah, and also, another great question. Would it be effective to look at a past test? Yes. Anytime you can look at questions that you've seen, that if you've seen them before, the point of the warm-up is not to challenge yourself on the hardest types of questions. It's just to get your brain going. So really any type of question that you can do. The only reason we suggest it with the app is because we think the questions are pretty good. Obviously, the real questions are the best questions you guys can have, so there's no getting over that if you have the test. The only reason we have the app is so that you can have it on your phone, so you don't have to stand in line with a practice test. But if you guys are okay with that, then definitely the practice test questions are by far the most accurate because they're just previous practice tests and they're going to be the same next time. So yeah, great question. Great question. Anything else, guys? It's a great one. Oh yeah, so great. Another question. So this is actually a really applicable one for everybody. When will the next time we know that the SAT is canceled? I think they have to let you know. To be honest, I think they'll have to let you know by tomorrow morning at the latest. They can't expect you guys to realize it's canceled like the night before. So I think you can probably assume that if it's on tomorrow morning, if you look at that list and your school is still not on that list, you can expect to take it on Saturday morning. Okay, and then finally a great one to review. Was it Eli? Yeah, Eli. The most important concepts to memorize: linear equations. So look at that chapter. Linear equations is huge, huge, huge. Y equals mx plus b, and understanding it in terms of like line of best fit, all that kind of stuff. That's a huge one on math. Systems of equations, right, where you have two equations and they intersect at one point. Systems of equations are a huge one. I highly recommend reviewing that. And then I would say graphs of functions. So graphs. Because these questions, graphs of functions, while they don't come up nearly as much, they're not nearly as common as these two probably. They are very easy questions if you know them. And they what we call in our class is hard concept. So it's a hard concept because you don't see it till Algebra 2 or beyond, right? Hard concept, easy question. So the SAT thinks that that's a hard concept, and it is generally. But if you review that, it becomes a super fast and super easy question. Any questions with synthetic division? In between now and Saturday, so synthetic division or long division has come up, polynomials with long division. It's always a really high-level problem. It's one of the high. It's going to be number 20, for example, in the no calculator section. I wouldn't review, unless you feel really confident with every other type of question, I wouldn't review synthetic division before Saturday. I would review it if you're especially if you're in the 700 plus category for the math section. I would review it, but it's probably 1 in 4 tests that it comes up, and so it's probably not worth it. If it does come up on Saturday, I apologize for making that statement, but it's probably one of those that you'll spend more time memorizing it. And if it doesn't come up, which is more likely, you probably spent an hour reviewing it when it's not. But again, if you're at a 700 or even a 750 and above, then I definitely review it for Saturday. 750 and above on the math section is just really where you start memorizing the highest level concepts because any of them could come up. So it's another great question. Thanks, Annie, for that question. Okay. Anything else, guys? What else? Anybody else have anything they want to discuss, talk about? You guys have been awesome with your questions tonight. I really appreciate it. It makes this a lot faster and a lot easier for me. Anything else, guys? Okay, hopefully everybody got a lot out of this. We like doing these. We like just having the opportunity for you guys to ask your questions, get any anxiety that you have out of the way before Saturday. And yeah, you guys are going to do great. Just keep working hard, guys. More than anything, even if you don't like doing this test, some of you do. I like taking these tests when I was a kid. It's one of the few things I actually like doing with schoolwork stuff. But even if you don't love taking these tests, just keep working hard, because if you work hard on something you don't like to do, when it comes to something that you do like to do, you will absolutely knock it out of the park. You will crush it. And so keep working hard, guys. That's the best advice I can give. When you get to Saturday, have that kind of mental fortitude to just keep pushing through, and you guys will do great. Okay, the ACT, you had a question here about ACT stuff. SAT is pretty straightforward now. The big difference in the ACT and the SAT, the math section on the ACT is a lot harder overall. On the ACT, it's a lot harder, and the reading section is a lot harder on the SAT. But generally, there's about 80% crossover now between the two tests. When the SAT switched in 2016, they made this huge new test. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that. But they made a big new test in 2016, and they basically admitted that their last test wasn't very good, and they mirrored the ACT in a lot of ways. Even down to those graphs that you guys get on the reading and writing language sections, those are trying to mirror the ACT science section in a lot of ways. So it's really just the difference between the ACT math and the ACT reading is the big one. One's easier and one's harder.
On the ACT, is there like only one math section?
There's only one math section.
Okay.
It's 60 questions, so it's still
Yeah.
It's still the
But
same.
it's like it's all with the calculator.
It's all with the calculator. The problem with it is that it's yeah, the problem is actually, guys, and that's a good question too. Albie, I actually took the ACT when I was a kid. I took the SAT, but not the SAT that you guys are taking. So it was at a 2400. It wasn't on the same scale, and that's why they changed it. It incorporated a lot of dumb things. Memorizing vocab just wasn't really necessary. It really didn't improve critical thinking. But wait, what was your the ACT? What was the question?
Is it just one section for math?
It's 1 second for math. Yeah, 60 questions, 60 minutes. It's just the hard part about it more than anything is the ACT math is just there's so many concepts. It's like you have to know vectors, and you have to know just like really obscure algebra 2 and pre-calculus concepts that don't really come up in any other aspect of your life. The SAT math section is a lot better than the ACT math section. And the ACT reading section is a lot better than the SAT reading section. Mm-hmm. So it's basically like the two harder sections that they tried to make are a lot worse. Mm-hmm. They're a lot less applicable. So, all right, guys, great job. If you guys have any questions between now and Saturday, let me know. Otherwise, go crush it. Don't have any reservations. I'm happy to answer any questions for you, and you guys will knock it out of the park. So good luck on Saturday. Keep looking at that list up until probably tomorrow morning in terms of site cancellations.